That's the most important thing that I'll do. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us. I am Weirzy from Fallout Daily Discussion, and welcome to a little Fallout debate, or as I think I'm calling this, a Fallout about Fallout. I'm joined by Micael Tanner, a fantastic writer and podcaster. You'll know him from the Fallout RPG podcast Rad Rolls. He's an avid Fallout fan, and I've just found out momentarily ago that he's a former roller derby referee. And I'm also joined by Lawrence McNamara. He's the lead writer and producer and creator of the renowned Fallout audio drama, The Modus Files. Lawrence also streams and has been involved in some great causes like Fallout for Hope. And he, of course, is a massive Fallout fan too. So today we're debating a question that you've maybe never pondered, or you've maybe pondered often, but I think it's a really great source for discussion with lots of perspectives. So today we're debating, should we stop role-playing as the Enclave? Michael's going to represent our agreeing opinion today, and Lawrence will be taking the disagree stance. So I'm going to hand over to Michael now to make his opening argument.
Hello. Let me clear my throat and prepare. So my issue with Enclave role players is that often they are role-playing disingenuously. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to role-play as a villain, role-play as a villain. I don't raise an eyebrow at Raider role-play. They seem to understand what they're doing. But most, if not all, Enclave role players that I see treat the Enclave as a sort of noble but tragic faction, a kind of Fallout version of the Lost Cause, which, if you are an American or versed in the American Civil War, is the whitewashing of the Confederacy to make it seem heroic and just, which it was not. They approach from a place that seems self-serving and inscrutable to me. The Enclave are the remnants of pre-war America, and America pre-war was a horrible place. The game lore makes this apparent. When the game plays heavily to satire, this is at the forefront. Remember crudely animated American soldiers in power armor executing a prisoner and then laughing heartily in the opening of one of the original games? That's America pre-war. And in-game, there's a lot more of it. Concentration camps mentioned in terminals, toxic waste dumps everywhere, 76's use of a real-world miners' strike in West Virginia as the inspiration to show how far the government is in big business's pocket. It's a militaristic, corrupt, proto-fascist nation. And the Enclave are the extension of that. They are the bad guys. And they are the bad guys then, and they are the bad guys in the game, genocidal and evil. This is canon. If you're going to roleplay as a villain, go for it. If you want to roleplay a hero, you can't do that in the villain faction. It's disingenuous. Unless you're going to address the evil the hero finds themselves surrounded by. If you're not doing that in the role play or the story you are telling, then I question what draws you to playing pretend fascist. There's too many emboldened real world ones that we have to deal with and in the Fallout fandom itself. So I can't bring myself to say, well, it's all good fun. If you want to role play a heroic Enclave character, maybe don't, because they really don't exist.
Thank you very much, Michael. We'll hand over to Lawrence now.
So I thought that was actually fantastic. And so I'm actually going to co-opt a lot of, or some of what you've put in there in my opening statement, only because I believe that role play of the Enclave is extremely important within the genre of Fallout. And I think it's important for some of the reasons that you actually described, which is that the Fallout universe is horrible. If you look at pre-war America, it was a proto-fascist nation where anything that was viewed as communist was put down. Obviously, there's a lot within Fallout 76 where they talk about how, actually the Somnus Project is probably one of the deepest, darkest secrets of Appalachia, where they actually took suspected communists and criminals and turned them into sleeper agents. There's a great story, which I incorporated into the podcast, about an agent that actually ran into a black bear, fought the bear, was torn apart, and still made it back to his home base before he died. This is an example of what pre-war America was like. Now, I will then also say that from a role-play perspective, I think that there are very good Enclave role players out there that really view and play within the gray. And I think that is something that we see across genres. I bring up the 501st Legion from Star Wars. These are stormtroopers who, on Vader's orders, executed children inside the Jedi Temple. And they do that, and they do that really well. At the same time, you go to the Andor TV show and you actually start seeing the other side of the Empire, which are just people who are doing their job. So I think that if we look at all of the factions within Fallout, I think it's important that we have Enclave as part of that, because it is the remnant of pre-war America, and it does show that no factions are actually the good guys. I mean, everybody's bad. I mean, you take the Brotherhood of Steel, for instance. You know, a lot of people play the Brotherhood of Steel as these noble knights who are protecting civilization. And no, actually, they're not. I mean, my joke around Fallout 4 is that the Brotherhood in Fallout 4 managed to out-enclave the Enclave. They were horrible. They executed and wiped out all of the ghouls at Boston Airport. Some of them may have been non-feral. So there's actually a side quest in that whole area that you actually learn a little bit about this, and there's a lot of moral ambiguity there. So while I agree with you that there are people that view the Enclave as kind of this noble, kind of lost cause type of situation, I also believe that every villain is the hero of their own story. So it's possible to actually play that faction and present it as a noble cause, but at the same time, you're going to do very, very horrible things, but you're doing it for what you consider to be the right reason. So I believe that in Fallout in general, nobody is the good guy. And it is important that people try to embody, you know, the different facets of each of the different factions. And were there people in the Enclave who actually did believe they were doing the right thing? Absolutely. Players should also take that view. But there are people, I believe, in the Enclave that did actually try to act nobly. So I don't look at it as a monolithic faction. I look at it as the opportunity for people to do good at the same time knowing that they will do bad. Plus, again, if you look at the other genres, even within sci-fi, it's important that we represent all of the different factions, the chaotic good all the way to chaotic evil. One thing I will not stomach, and I will just leave this as kind of the last thing, is leave the role play in the role play. What we do inside the Fallout universe, inside the games, inside our interactions with the community has no bearing on anything that goes on outside. But this is important, and the Enclave is an important faction, and it should be treated as such.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Lawrence. That was a really powerful way to end. Actually, I was just scribbling a few notes there, which is the delay. Just Okay, well, look, I think those were both actually really good opening arguments, because where we've actually went to straight away is not just a really blunt let's stop it, let's not stop it, because we've actually both sort of moved towards each other in the way it can be done sometimes can be quite poor, but obviously where things start to then pull is, as you've said, Lawrence, as you closed, they are an important faction that you know, it is worth exploring. And so I think, and now I'm just going to bring some questions to each of you from your statements, and we'll just discuss those. So I'll start with you, Micael. You talked a little bit about how the pre-war America in the Fallout universe is pretty much horrible, right? It's kind of got itself into this state where it is a little bit nightmarish. And, you know, people talk about the Red Scare in the 50s. You know, this is that on serious steroids, and worse. And as you say, in terms of the in-game annexation of Canada and so on, that brings about some pretty horrible atrocities. Without biting off more that we can chew in a Fallout podcast, is that so different from reality? I mean, obviously there's not been an annexation of Canada, but I don't think it would be outrageous to say the US's global record hasn't been all shiny. You know, just because perhaps someone takes national pride in a country that isn't perfect, you know, does that parallel to someone perhaps enjoying a faction and wanting to role play in a faction that isn't perfect?
threw me for a curve at the end there. I think so, to kind of like go through there. Yes, America today, there are similarities, because that's kind of like the strength of Fallout is the satire, and if satire has to come from somewhere in order to be relevant and hit. So you can see a lot of the like, the negative parts of America were dialed up for Fallout.
Yep.
And those negative parts have only gotten worse since in the 25 years since the game came out. So it is this progression, and where is America 200 years in the future of the Fallout? Like, would we be there? Maybe. So like that's what I that's kind of the sad state of things, right? Is that there are people in the real world who feel drawn to wanting to fantasize and role play as like what America is in the game. Which is I think very telling. Like I also like Lawrence brought up the 501st. My joke with the 501st, the charity group, is that like, great, they do great charity work. I am friends of a lot of those guys. I wish they didn't dress up as space fascists to deliver toys to kids. Like, what is it that draws them? And a lot of them are ex-military. They love uniforms. Like, it's a lot that draws people to it. It's the same stuff that draws people to fascism and to nationalism. It's not something I think is great to play to. That's what I think is part of the danger, is people act out in ways that make them feel good, and they get drawn to things that they get drawn to, and I wish it wasn't genocidal fascism.
I think that's fair. I think that's very fair. Just to go round to some more parts of your opening argument there. Do you think it's entirely fair to say there are no even morally gray characters in the Enclave? So you maybe can think of others, but I just want to very briefly bring up Colonel Autumn from Fallout 3. No, I think it needs to be said explicitly. He is not a good guy. Perhaps as Lawrence says, he's the good guy in his own world. But I think from the outside in, no one is going to say Colonel Autumn is the good guy in the story. But I think his particular character opens up a much grayer sphere, especially when you compare him to the Zax machine, John Henry Eden, right? The AI president. Colonel Autumn pretty explicitly in the game is portrayed to not desire to wipe out everyone with FEV mutations in them, right? It seems quite clear that's kind of where the line is drawn with him, and where he kind of is different from the AI. Yes, perhaps non-feral ghouls are exterminated under his vision, but obviously the John Henry Eden AI takes it that step further to essentially all wastelanders that are going to drink the water. Spoilers for Fallout 3, but all wastelanders that are going to drink the water will die. And Colonel Autumn draws that back and does have a bit of a messiah complex, where he really does see himself and the Enclave as the savior. But a character like that, even compared to Maxon in Fallout 4, potentially, is he slightly more noble? You tell me.
No. He may be capable of a redemption arc, because the story, until he dies, his story isn't done yet. But he's still part of a genocidal faction. Like, there's gray actions, but it's like Hitler loved dogs. That doesn't make him a gray character. Like,
fair.
Having a noble aspect of your character, or a likable aspect of your character, does not wipe away the overall actions that you partake in. Like I said, you can't be a hero in a villain faction unless you're going to address the villainy around you. If you're going to like say if the character arc is you becoming aware of like, wait a second, are we the baddies to like, you know, the meme?
Yeah.
Like you could come back from that. I firmly believe as a writer, redemption arcs are satisfying, and redemption arcs can happen in real life and in stories. They should happen. But a character being like, yeah, that character could have a redemption arc doesn't mean they would. So I think a good topic would be the Enclave remnants from New Vegas. Those are very interesting characters who you can give them a bit of a redemption arc. They're mostly just hiding, like they're in hiding. They are doing probably what they should because they were part of the villain faction or raised. Like Arcade is a good example. Like his parents were Enclave. He's not guilty by association really, but he understands like, oh, my background, I gotta lay low and keep this part of my past secret. But those characters have a redemption arc if you recruit them to help in the final battle, because there's we can talk about Gray, but like NCR might be somewhat corrupt, might have done some terrible things like with the slaughter of the Khans, but compare them to Caesar's Legion. Like Gray is a wide Pantone, and some characters are way I would not consider them in the gray, but I think that's a good example of those are characters from a villain faction who can have a redemption arc.
No, I think that's fair. I think they are a great group to focus on because, as you say, depending on how the courier wants to interact with them, they can be siding with the Legion, right? Which is just, you know, that redemption arc just U-turns right back around the villain in a sense. Okay, thank you. So look, just one very brief final question, just in terms of how we're cutting up good, bad, how we role play. When you think about the protagonists of each of the games, and I'm going to go back to Fallout 3 because that's when we see, you know, in modern Fallout games, potentially the most of the Enclave. There's something that only really twigged with me recently that's quite dark, right? Whenever the Lone Wanderer, the protagonist of Fallout 3, is leaving Raven Rock and he's sort of fighting his way out, and John Henry Eden's gonna, you know, self-destruct and so on. Pretty much every single Enclave scientist that you encounter takes the flee action and runs away and is non-hostile. But canonically in the game, every time you still leave Raven Rock and you hear the explosion and the whole base is destroyed without, you know, Fallout 4 style, all these scientists being let out the back door. So is there kind of room to say that, you know, the character you're forced to play kind of can, and sometimes is just through the story of the game, is forced to commit some pretty atrocious acts that are, you know, they're maybe not full-scale genocide, but they are pretty horrific.
Yeah. The and that game is kind of unique in the weird, sad way, because due to you are railroaded a lot in Fallout 3. Like you can't fully join the Enclave, but you can kind of side with the Enclave, but the game is still kind of going to play out the way it is. But also, those Enclave scientists are Enclave scientists. They were working on some pretty terrible stuff.
Yeah.
They were working for the bad guys. I do not have sympathy for them. Like, I just can't. Like, so I don't really care that they get blown up in Raven Rock. Contrast that with Fallout 4 with destroying the Institute, where that's I would say that's more in the gray.
And I think that's fair to say. I mean, you're in no way wrong. I think, again, I don't have it in front of me, but I think there's a lot of logs and a lot of terminals in Raven Rock that suggest that is not a fun place to be. So yeah, no, look, that is great, and that is a well defended stance. So thank you very much. I'm just for the next few minutes going to turn my attention to Lawrence, and we're just going to talk about that position. So I think and you did address this in part as you opened, but just to come back down on it and kind of open the discussion up again. Do you think that there is genuine risk that role playing as a dangerous or evil group does risk leading people down a dangerous road in terms of thinking? You know, you ended by saying role play, enjoy role play, and then leave it there. Is there like everyone has a different personality type? Do you think there are people vulnerable to not being able to leave it there, and as they start to enjoy role playing, they kind of just start to take on reality, you know, within that mindset?
So I think that's actually an excellent question. And it's one that goes far beyond just this particular discussion, which is, what effect is it that what we do in pretend world, what does that lead to in the real world? And would that person have done something bad out there if they hadn't been exposed to all of this in here? And I do think that there's a certain subset that get drawn to certain factions within the gaming community because it reinforces beliefs and feelings that they already have. So I wouldn't necessarily say that that would be the cause. I do believe that there are people that people that have that raider attitude, they get drawn in, and so I don't think that it's necessarily something that's going to. I don't think it's something that leads somebody down that road. I think they were already going down that road. This just becomes an outlet for their activities and their thoughts and their actions. I'm a big believer in personal responsibility, that if, you should know, you should know better. But I think if you try to make that argument in Fallout, you have to make that argument in any other game that's out there. Modern Warfare, Fortnite, Overwatch, all of the games that are out there that have quote unquote evil factions.
Mm-hmm.
Is having that evil faction going to cause somebody to do something else? No. I mean, if they were going to do something, it was already in their DNA to be able to do that. So I think that in this case, what I don't like to see, though, are people that bring the over the top real world attitude into games, because I think that's where it becomes a bigger issue. Those are the trolls, the griefers, and the people that start espousing, I would call them real world attitudes in Fallout. Like if I was role playing as the Enclave and I was saying, hey, all ghouls should die, yeah, that's actually the way that the faction should be played. If I'm Brotherhood of Steel, hey, you guys are hiding that technology, I'm going to come and get you. Again, same thing. But as soon as you start talking to people in real world terms, you cross the line. And I think that's where we as a community need to kind of step in and do some policing of our own. Because I think, again, that's kind of where we end up.
And I think, a great area of relevance really is Fallout 76. So, because as you say, those real world attitudes, if you want to role play your Fallout 4 character as an Enclave personnel deep undercover in the Commonwealth, that's just you in a single player experience. And as you say, someone may take attitudes in or out of the game, but Fallout 76 is obviously such a community experience. If I'm wandering about the wasteland as a 16-year-old, because let's be real, 16-year-olds are probably playing that game and younger, and I bump into an Enclave RPer who is taking it in the wrong direction, let's say, that's exactly what you're describing, right? Real world meets game world, and that could be grim. I wanted to ask a question about the point you made in terms of the Brotherhood of Steel. And you kind of said, the Brotherhood of Steel and Fallout 4 kind of out Enclave the Enclave. Do you think that's kind of a good enough reason? I know it's not your only reason, of course, but to just point at the Brotherhood of Steel and go, oh, well, role-playing them could be bad too. and I suppose we could say the same about raider groups, right? Like, you're role playing as a raider. That seems a bit, but is it one of these things where actually, let's not just point at all the problems. Let's see where there's solutions. So do you think that it's something where, maybe we do genuinely also have to look at our mindset when we're role playing a raider or when we're role playing Maxon style Brotherhood?
So I think so one thing I hate whataboutism. So I will not just point at somebody and say, oh, well, what about that? Because you can say that, well, yes, they are equally bad, but in the moment, is one actually worse than the other? And what the Enclave does in Fallout 3 is horrible. It's really, really bad. Fallout 2, same thing. When you blow up that oil rig, you are doing a definite good. That's just flat out the way that it is. I will also say that we live in a world in which you cannot have great heroes if you do not have great villains. Batman would not be Batman without the Joker. Superman would not be Superman without Lex Luthor. You need to have someone opposite of you to make a greater hero, because then otherwise you're just, oh, okay. I mean, and you look at the number of people that actually quote unquote, root for the villains. I think that there's a storytelling aspect to what we are all doing. And it is important to have those to have something in opposition of what you are doing. And so I think that in Fallout 4, you can side with the Brotherhood. You can also feel, I think, very comfortable siding with the Minuteman or the Railroad or the Institute and blowing up the Prydwen. You get to meet a lot of child scribes in the Prydwen. That's, you're going to blow that thing up. And guess what? You just wiped out a generation of children.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very fine line. And that's why I think this discussion is so interesting, because I think that you can see both sides of it to say, you know what, we really shouldn't, quote unquote, role play becomes then very narrowly defined, which is you are acting within the confines of the story. Where it becomes, I think, the greater discussion is around a game like you just brought up, which is Fallout 76, where suddenly it is the community that's actually role playing. And that's, I think, where it becomes much more of a gray area around what is the appropriate behavior and does that still constitute role play? Because if I look at, say the Enclave within Fallout 3, I think you can actually role play that in many different ways. I mean, if I was Colonel Autumn, for instance, I just to bring up a point from earlier, of everyone you meet in the Enclave, he is probably the least objectionable. Of course, that's saying that, but that's also saying like Hitler loved dogs. So, I mean, it's kind of a bit of the same argument, but to me, Autumn was a more compelling character than Eden was, because Eden, once you get to know him, he's an all or nothing kind of guy. He's going to kill everything. Autumn, you can actually have a reasonable conversation with. I think as we look at this as a community, it's about where that line is and what actually makes a compelling story. I think too many people don't want to be part of a compelling story. They want to either be the mustache twirling villain or they want to be the halo wearing hero. Yeah. I personally believe that more complex and characters that live deep in the gray are much more interesting for people to both learn about and then also role play. And again, if you just know where those lines are and you stay within them, I think that's actually, again, part of making a more compelling story.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, from interacting with other, Fallout fans, I've had conversations about a game like 3 and even a game like New Vegas. And I think one of the things a lot of players actually find most difficult to do when they authentically try and role play, they can never really max out the karma skill. It's very difficult to try and be genuine in a wasteland and go full evil or full, as you say, full devil horns or full halo. That isn't a very common reality. And I do think it's interesting that that's reflected by a lot of players in game experience. I'm going to ask this last question to Lawrence, but I think actually it's quite a good question to then open us up. So, Michael, after please feel free to chip in, and then we can just start discussing more between the three of us. So Lawrence, Michael said something that was interesting about if you're gonna play the villain faction, play as a villain, or at least address the villainous stuff that's going on around you. And that actually did, just on the spot, make me think. Now, you will know more about this than I do, but in a sense, is Modus that character that does something to address the villainous behavior around him, or it, in terms of exterminating the members of the Enclave? I'm not saying he goes about it in a particularly heroic way, but obviously we see in the lore of 76, spoilers if you haven't played 76, we see that Enclave group are going in a particularly dark step to up the kind of alert levels, and obviously Modus, wrongly or rightly, interferes in that. He/it is an AI, so not really a character, but that's a whole argument in itself. Is he a character? But is he kind of close to morally gray / slightly virtuous Enclave character? I don't know. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
So Modus is very interesting because you can't ascribe regular motivations to him. He doesn't think in terms of good or bad. He has a set of instructions that he's following. And when he exterminated the old Enclave, he actually did it in self-defense. It had really nothing to do with what was going on at the time. It was actually, in my opinion, a horrible mistake for the people that were rebelling against Eckhart, against spoilers, if you haven't played 76, that they tried to blow up Modus. I think if they hadn't tried to blow him up, he would have been okay with it. He would have been like, okay, you arrested Eckhart. Okay, what are your orders now? What would you like me to do? And instead, he was injured. He fixed the problem. That was his solution. Where I think we as players run into an interesting conundrum is we are helping him, and we are reconnecting him to all of these systems that he didn't have access to before. Is that virtuous? I don't know. It's actually one of the reasons why I so enjoyed kind of writing a story around all of that, because I believe that it's really up to us on whether we believe he's one of the good guys or not. I obviously have my deep down, and I won't reveal any spoilers about where things are going in my story. But in general, I think we have to think long and hard about giving something like Modus access to an orbital platform that can drop, titanium rods anywhere in Appalachia that we want, that quote unquote we want. How much of it is actually him potentially manipulating us into doing things? So, but from an Enclave standpoint, Modus is also the most rational, logical, and less insane AI that we've met thus far. Every other AI that we've met in the Fallout series is freaking crazy. I think that you can point to Modus as being the one who is, I think, just dedicated to efficiency and dedicated to furthering the goals of what he has in front of him. So from that standpoint, I'd almost think of him as lawful neutral, because he is not making decisions based on what is considered good or bad. He's making decisions on what he believes is just best at that particular time. So that's my humble opinion.
Yep. Do you want to add anything? You don't have to, but if you feel like it's appropriate, Michael, please.
Oh yeah, I do think the Enclave missions in 76 are a very kind of unique, have a very unique place, because the character that you play, your Vault Dweller, is completely ignorant of everything. So it's, and also because Modus is relying on the player character to accomplish anything. It's a very interesting kind of place to put the Enclave in that game, because they're completely impotent except for if the player character chooses to do things. But the character doesn't know what they're actually doing. There's a lot of kind of player agency in 76, which when you get like macro with it, it's just very bizarre. Like you're like, it's a game. That's why I'm a big proponent of the 76 as a simulation theory, because like a lot of it like it's just very bizarre. So yeah, that's why I think Modus is a very interesting as a character and as an AI, because it's in some ways it's an AI, but also doesn't seem as advanced as obviously the AIs that we meet, 200 years in the future. So there's a very kind of old school kind of data card AI element to Modus that makes it interesting. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
No, I appreciate that. I think I think it's interesting, Lawrence, that you kind of came down on the side of lawful neutral. Was it with Modus? I would say lawful strays slightly toward good, but I'm sure that's very interpretive for people. But look, I'm gonna just open this. If you guys have any questions for each other, feel free to ask. I have some more questions, but I'll let you guys lead if there's anything that you just want to talk about each other's positions a little bit more.
So question I had for you, Michael, and actually we've had I think some great interactions online as well, kind of around some of this, is how much of your position would you ascribe to the general attitude of some of the Enclave role players that you run into in the game or in the community? How much of that has kind of formed your opinion? I'm really curious about that.
I would say most of my opinion is formed on coming from a lore perspective, like coming like at the lore, knowing what I do about the game. Like I don't get it. Like I said in my statement, it's inscrutable to me why. Like I also on some level I don't get like people playing villains in RPGs. Like I'm just like, that's fun. That does not appeal to me. So that as a personal opinion kind of emanates out where I'm like, I don't get why you're doing this. Like it doesn't seem fun to me. And the things that I'm observing from you are not things that I find that I want to be around. Like I do like on Twitter, is it Enclave President? I do get a good kick out of my interactions with that Twitter account because it's very funny because I think they are more on the side. I think they role play more as the Enclave is bad, but play it as kind of a dumb politician, which I like. I'm like, if you're going to role play the Enclave, yeah, do as like an evil politician who's dumb. Like that kind of approach I like and I can appreciate. But like I was saying, it kind of extends. Like I don't get why people like dress up as stormtroopers to give toys to kids. Like there's just so much I don't get the attraction to the bad guy faction. Like I can understand people like I have my favorite villains in comic books. I'm a comic book writer. Like, but it seems to go a step beyond. Because I think at least because because it's not something that appeals to me, I don't pay close attention to it. Maybe there's a lot of Enclave role players that are doing like stuff where like they are confronting like the background or the history or whatever, but it seems like for the most part it's a lot of military role players who like, this is the military in Fallout, so this is what I'm playing as, and without the questioning. So that's kind of where I come from with it.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense, and I just in hearing your position, it kind of makes me think about when I started writing the story that I wrote and why I chose the Enclave as the basis for that, and what was I trying to accomplish. And at the end of the day, as a writer, you try to come up with a compelling story that people are going to be interested in. And for me, it was actually trying to get people to root for the bad guys without necessarily realizing that that's what they were doing. And then having the reader or the listener have to confront a person that they like that just did something really, really horrible. Like, does that change your opinion of that person? Do you need to think about something else? So I can certainly see, I can certainly see your position as far as like, why would somebody want to role play that way? I look at it from a creator's perspective, and I think that that's a more compelling story to tell, only because why would someone always want to hear a story about the hero just winning without, it's like you end up getting into the I call it the Matrix complex. At the end of the Matrix movie, the first one, Neo wins. He becomes a god within the Matrix. What do you do after that? Like, what villain could you throw at him that would make that story any more compelling than it already was? Because you just won the game.
Mm-hmm.
I look at it more as, you know, if you don't have a villain who you can root for, even though you don't necessarily like everything that they've done, you can then throw a hero at that story and suddenly you create really cool conflict. So maybe it transcends this idea of role play, but I think that there's always going to be a need for, and I fully believe that like mustache twirling villains need to be thrown out the door. I think those kinds of characters are too one-dimensional. People need to reach beyond that. I want somebody to be able to look at it and say, you know what, boy, that person is horrible, but you know what, I can kind of see their point of view. I can kind of understand why that would make sense in the context. And actually, as you take pre-war America or even post-war America as the underlying kind of, you know, foundation of all of these stories, none of these people come from clean backgrounds. I mean, you know, a good story is, you know, Maxim, you know, Captain Maxim at Mariposa. You know, when he finds out about FEV, the first thing he does is that he takes all of those scientists, lines them up against a wall and shoots them. I mean, Brotherhood of Steel did not start with clean hands. You know, none of these factions did. So it's really a question of, I think it comes back to, are you role playing the way that you want the world to be, or are you actually role playing the way the world actually is, and playing within the confines of that character? And I can point out that I do actually don't mind playing a bad character, because it allows me to fight against this idea that I always have to be good. Because, you know, I think, again, playing that hero character is easy. Playing somebody that's much more morally gray is actually hard. And that is actually one of the reasons why maybe some people enjoy it, because it's a harder character to play.
So two things I want to talk about here is I think there's a very difference between us as writers with stories we're crafting, because we are the masters of that story. I don't think role playing plays into that, because people, if they're role playing, like say in a context of 76, it's a collaborative storytelling process, so they don't have control of the story. And if they're just role playing, they're not necessarily telling, and there's not exactly a narrative. We as writers get to craft a narrative. We get to set up the story of like, oh, these are people you thought were good, or you're rooting for them. They do something terrible. Let's see what happens. That is a benefit that we get of being the masters of that. We can craft that story. Role players don't necessarily and aren't necessarily doing that. Like, so someone who's role playing as an Enclave person isn't necessarily crafting a narrative that the same way you are when you're telling a story about the Enclave. So I think that is a marked difference, and where it doesn't necessarily cross over. But to get to your point of Maxim and the origin of the Brotherhood of Steel, take as Maxim was part of the American military. So for all intents and purposes, Enclave. Confronted with scientists doing a horrific human experiment, kills those scientists, and essentially is like, secedes from the Union, I guess is the best, where like it's like, nope, this is not happening. I don't consider that gray. I consider that like that like executing of the scientists. Okay, that is a very kind of, let's talk about the morals of that. That is a thing. But I do not think that makes the origin of the Brotherhood of Steel like their hands are dirty. Like, those scientists were bad guys. Like, they were bad guys. Maxim killed the bad guys. He did what we do in the games. So I think that's a very, like, the parallels between the Enclave and the Brotherhood of Steel are very good. It's a very good kind of narrative within the Fallout lore. Like, American military rebels. Normally they would have, like, the hammer of the military would have come down on Maxon and killed all of those people. The families, the kids, everyone, that they would have just been wiped out. The war happens, which saves them, which then creates, like, Maxon goes on to found the Brotherhood of Steel, and Brotherhood of Steel concerned with technology, to the point of myopic, like, fixation on collecting technology, which removes them from, being kind of a hero faction. They are a nuisance at best in 1 and 2. I guess they're in 2, they're like kind of there a little bit, right? You don't do much with them. And then we get a bunch of like weird games with the Brotherhood of Steel. It's very bizarre. We choose not to talk about them. Fallout 3 comes and we get an entirely different, evolved, concerned, and heroic faction in Fallout 3, which then is corrupted by the heir apparent of Maxon in Fallout 4, which the Brother of Steel in Fallout 4 out enclaves the Enclave, but it is seen as like it's not a good thing. Like, it is presented as like, oh yeah, they're a bit too far, like like the Railroad's like, yeah, fuck those guys. Minutemen are like, I don't really like those guys. They're not presented as a hero faction in Fallout 4 or Fallout 3. They are presented as the hero faction. So that evolution is to Fallout 4 is considered, they're closer to the Enclave in Fallout 4, and they are the bad guy. They are not, well, not necessarily bad guys. They are not the heroic faction. And I think that's definitely the point of view of the game, is that like, hey, these guys aren't great. The not greatness of other factions in Fallout 4 is like Institute, very much bad. Brother of Steel, kind of bad. Minutemen, I think there must have been a lot of cut content with the Minutemen, because I think there is some dialogue options that make it seem like the Minutemen are supposed to be more like rednecky and kind of like, they're problematic. So, and then like Railroad, that for some reason a lot of Fallout fans have a lot of vitriol for, are literally probably the closest thing to a hero faction in the game. And so it's that spectrum, but still the faction closest to bad guy that while not being out and out villain is closer to the Enclave. Like it's I think it's a great progression of the story. But we also get Paladin Dance as being the potential for redemption arc within the Brotherhood story. Brotherhood hates synths. Devoted Brotherhood member is a synth. And again, like in cut content, that would have actually come to a head, and you would be able to redeem the Brotherhood as a faction, but that got cut. So I think it's the game can get very complicated with moral choices and ambiguity. And that's part of why we love it, right? Is you have a lot of options, but when it comes down to like, what option do I want to pretend to be when like playing around for fun? That's where it gets in like, maybe don't.
Yeah.
Or, like embrace it.
Yeah. And I actually, I'm definitely going to stand by the position that I actually enjoy playing a villain faction only because it allows me to craft a story around the tragedy of that. Because I do believe that the Brotherhood to me does represent the U.S. military. That's kind of what I believe. The U.S. military still had some moral character to it, which I believe was redeemed by Maxim, and that's kind of how I would see that. The Enclave was definitely more like the intelligence community, the special ops guys, the people that unfortunately have just way too big of an ego for themselves, and that's the reason why they were kind of the shadow government inside the government. I love the tragedy of that story, because you have people that truly believe that they're doing the right thing, but they're doing it within the context of a horrible environment that they themselves created. They're supporting big business. They were supporting the war. They were pulling the strings behind the scenes. And when the war happened, especially in Appalachia, what's the first thing they did? They retreated into a bunker and they made things even worse. There's a tragedy to that story because there were many opportunities for them to go in a different direction. and the righteousness of their cause is what ultimately led to their belief in the righteousness of their cause caused them to ultimately fail. And for someone that is willing to role play that and to role play the tragedy of it and not try to sugarcoat it, I think that there's I won't say a nobility to it because it's not nobility, but I think that there is something to that in which you can build a really good role play around that. I actually think and agree with you that the disingenuous of when you start getting disingenuous, when you start thinking, oh, well, oh, the Enclave wasn't that bad. Oh, they were just, oh, they were really trying to help people. And it's like, no, they weren't. No, they were totally out for themselves. They wanted to rebuild the country the way that it was. That's exactly what they wanted to do. And especially in 76, you actually do need people who can embody that, who can bring that story into the environment, into the community. It's when you start trying to make them something that they're not, that's when you break canon, that's when you break lore, and suddenly you're not the Enclave, you're just some guys dressed up in military uniforms that have decided that you want to be something. That's just a completely different story, different faction, don't even go there. But I will say, man, if you're going to play the villain, do it. Do it and do it right. And, because again, kind of gets back to this idea of raiders. There's a fine line between being a griefer and being a raider. There are people out there that do it really, really well. Unfortunately, there are also people that use it as a veneer to be something else. So that's all I have to say about that.
But so what does role playing that tragedy look like to you?
So it's hard for me to really put the fine point on it without going back to wanting to tell a story, which is, and there are a lot of aspects of the story of Fallout 76 that you can tell from the perspective of, hey, I'm the Vault 76 dweller. I found the Enclave. I really like the idea of having Modus behind, looking over my shoulder. I like having this power. I want to rebuild Appalachia in the image of what I was taught in Vault 76, which is really kind of the story of what the Enclave wanted to tell, which is America was a great place. We're the best and brightest. Like, if that's not the Enclave message, I don't know what is. Because Vault Tech, for all intents and purposes, was part of the Enclave. So we were sent out there, and it seems to me that the moment we would meet Modus, it would click in our heads like, yeah, this is exactly what we need. I need a guy who's got a satellite. I need all of this power armor. I need all of this. This is what drives that story, which is we're going to rebuild something that was rotten from the core to begin with. So the tragedy of that story is building upon a foundation of sand, that we are going down the exact same path that led to the Great War in the first place. And we will end up doing horrible things, because I can imagine non-feral ghouls. I just came out of the vault. That thing looks ugly. I'm going to shoot it and kill it, whether or not it's trying to talk to me or whatever. So it seems to me that if you actually follow the true kind of lore and how they present us in 76, everybody that comes out of that vault should go into the White Spring and immediately create a new Enclave. It's really our own kind of morality that we bring into the game from outside that would have us do anything else. That's the argument that I'll stand on, which is like, if you follow the game to the letter, we should all be living inside the White Spring right now. And we should all be listening to what Modus says.
I think that's a really interesting point. I guess that is one of the things that kind of doesn't bug me about 76, but I feel like there was no good way for it to do this properly, is that it's supposed to be 25 years. So unless we're playing characters who are middle-aged or older, we shouldn't know pre-war America. So there should, like, and if you are playing an older character, I kind of get that. But if you're playing someone who grew up in the vault, I feel like there should be a lot more based on the character of the Overseer, who I feel like would be the one who would make a young person coming out of the vault not trust Modus. Is that like that her character seems very much like more honest and like subversive, I guess, in a weird way. Even though a lot of her logs, I guess she does kind of be like, she's kind of shocked at things, and we kind of learn. But I feel like that character is more subversive. But yeah, like the ages of the players and the vault, I think, is something they couldn't really do correctly. And a lot of the stuff of some of the children you encounter, I'm like, you should be much older. Like the Secret Service, the little kid, PETA in the Secret Service vault. I'm like, you're 10 years old. You should be in your 20s if you're the kid of two of the Secret Service agents, because I guarantee they didn't wait 15 years to have a kid like in that vault. So that's just a minor nitpick I've always had, where it's like that kid should be much older. But yeah, I think that is like the worldview of the vault dweller in 76, like would be more predisposed. But I guess that's the freedom of like, you could secretly be even like, my parents are secretly communists, and I believe that, I'm communist, or I'm secretly a free stater, which Ryan, I feel like that would be a good debate for the future. Is like, exactly what's up with the free states?
That's a great one.
I used to think they were actually more like, they're like probably like militia, like real world right-wing militia. But the more I learn, I'm like, wait, were they secretly communists? Were they like a secret communist militia? Or are they a weird amalgam based on like the world that they were in? Is there like, it's a lot of like moonshiners and farmers and then like communists who all came together for the free states. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. But
yeah, I think no, yeah, I know. But see, on that point, I think it's an interesting lens to look at each of the games through, because just as you say, Lawrence, and I do partially agree with you, Michael, that a lot of the character ages don't line up well. But even from the point of view of the kind of Vault Tech propaganda, right? Like even as you go through character creation, obviously it's game mechanics, but it's also layered upon you very much so this like get out there and rebuild America kind of vibe. And I do see, Lawrence, how you say it would be difficult for someone who's had that layered on them as they've grown up to then not find modus and not think this is the right thing to do. I think the protagonist in Fallout 3 is one of the few ones who, I understand the game mechanics work differently and you are slightly railroaded away from helping the Enclave, but I actually think that maybe makes sense when you layer on that character's story and how the first place they're coming to is Megaton, which is diverse and seems somewhat successful, and how that might shape a person's worldview. But interestingly, the sole survivor in 4, if you're playing a male character, you are ex-military. And there is, I wonder how, if the Enclave existed in the context of 4, how that might look. I think that's a whole interesting, because I'm sure people do, mod Fallout 4, stick in the Enclave remnants armor, under the house, and straight out of the vault, straight into their power armor. I'm Enclave, take out the Brotherhood of Steel and so on. Probably a lot of the time side with the Institute. Maybe, I don't know. That's something maybe people can let us know if you're role playing as the Enclave often. Look, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate it. That was very good spirited, a very interesting chat. I appreciate, Lawrence, you answering, how you actually see someone role playing that in a accurate but also a slightly more hopeful manner. That's not just I'm the bad guy, but as you often say, I'm the hero of my story, which is the bad guy's story, but it's my perspective. And I do think that is probably kind of the saving grace for role playing the Enclave, that having those characters is important. It's important context, and if done well, kind of as you even parallel it with people role playing as readers, if done well, does it enhance other players' experience? That's a question for other players to answer. Just as we start to close out, I would love it if you guys could just briefly, in a minute or two, maybe just say what it is about your opponent's argument that you think is most convincing or most standoutish, or you would align with most strongly. I know we are already very close kind of in this discussion with a lot of, agreement, but if there's one or maybe just two things that you think in particular you would align with, why don't you start us off, Lawrence?
So what I really liked and what I do hardly agree with, and I've actually it has changed my mind somewhat, is if you're going to role play, really role play, call yourself a role player, you need to really kind of immerse yourself in the, I would say it was the culture of the faction that you're trying to role play. I think that it's fine if you want to create your own and you want to be more of that hopeful, but still have the trappings of one of the other ones. But you know, Enclave, for better or for worse, in the Fallout universe, is they are the bad guys. And if you are going to go down that road, you need to accept that. You need to act appropriately, within lines. Again, we're within a game. But I do heartily agree, and I think Mike did a great job of bringing that to the forefront. That you can't have your cake and eat it too. You really need to decide who you're going to be, and then act appropriately. And I think that that's, for me now, I think I'm going to be looking through that lens when I start talking to people. It's like, hey, are you really, is this really what you're doing, or are you just covering yourselves in the trappings of that because you think it looks cool, because it sounds cool? So I thought that was an excellent argument, and I can be fully behind that.
What about you, Michael?
Yeah, I feel like there's not much daylight between our positions. So I think what I took the most, or like the most, was like the importance of personal storytelling, of someone wanting to tell their narrative the way they want to tell their narrative. I think that's with role playing in general, like it's you're wanting to tell a story, and you're wanting to exist in it, and you want to drive your narrative. And I think that's the desire for people to kind of have that, the agency to do that their way, I think is the best takeaway. Like kind of like you said, like hope you're doing it well and with the best intentions. Like it's fun to play the bad guy. I get it.
Yeah. No, I mean, Lawrence, or sorry, Michael, one quick question for you. Just curious on my mind as you were talking earlier. Have you played New Vegas?
Oh yeah, I love New
Have
Vegas.
you ever done a Legion playthrough?
Never would. No interest in it.
I thought so. As you were talking, I just thought that's a man who has no desire to play as the Legion. Yeah,
I mean,
fair.
First time I played Fallout 4, I did a railroad playthrough, and it it tore me up to take out the Predwin. Like I was like, oh man, I have all right, I guess this is what I'm doing. So, and I've gone through Fallout 4 multiple times since then. Never done another railroad playthrough. Usually I do Minutemen or Brotherhood of Steel, but usually Minutemen.
Yeah. Ironically enough, I cannot play the Institute in Fallout 4. Like absolutely, like I can't touch them. I just don't like them. Don't think that they'd be successful, and they're too evil for me. And that's saying something. So
yeah. The Institute is it's a hard sell. I think at some point we'll probably have a debate between they're possible, they're okay, because I'm sure there are people who take that position, and we'll have someone disagree with that. Who's our beautiful little friend, Michael?
Oh, this is Pigeon. She's one of my dogs, and she's very needy, and she hasn't been pet in a little while.
Pigeon's a very sweet name. I enjoy Pigeon. I like that. Look, fellas, I will just close this off, and then we can. I know you have to run, Lawrence, so we can say goodbye. We can chat for a bit, but I'll just get this sign off in the recording. Just within this, I'm gonna shout each of you out, and feel free to plug whatever you want to plug. Absolutely, you're doing me a massive favor by being here. So please take your plug time and enjoy it and go wild. So Look, thank you both so much for sharing, and thank you for listening in good faith as well. I've said it before and I will say it again, it is extremely brave to come on to share some opinions, but it's even more brave to have them poked and examined by other people. I think you both did justice to the size of your argument. I think, the truth is we were both very, very close on where we were discussing. It's just, as we talked about, that kind of disingenuous, and actually then as we came to a close, we kind of even started to agree on that, which was really cool. I think now the most important thing to do is just throw this question out to Fallout fans everywhere. So, what do you think? Should we stop playing the Enclave? Should we change the way we play the Enclave, perhaps, when we role play? Let's carry this discussion on, okay? If you're on YouTube, there's comments. If you're on Spotify or any other podcasting platform, why don't check out our Twitter page? We're at Fallout_daily_. I know that's a mouthful. So once more, that's at Fallout_daily_. And we're the Fallout Daily Discussion. There'll be a thread attached to this episode. And please let us know what are your thoughts on role playing as the Enclave. Please give these guys a follow. They are excellent, and the content they create and feature in is excellent as well. You can find Lawrence as at Modus Files on Twitter. That's the handle for his show, the Modus Files. And Michael can be found as at Mike is Ernie, which is a great name. Guys, why don't you let us know where we can see more of you, we can hear more of you, read more of you? I know, Michael. Why don't you start us off, Lawrence?
Yeah. So the podcast is available on all major podcasting platforms. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Good Pods. Just search for the Modus Files. We also have a YouTube channel that is just under Modus Files. So we upload all of our content there. And then we also have a website, which is just modusfiles.com. We again upload episodes there and would love to get a few more visitors. Last thing is we are actually doing also a live stream for Fallout for Hope. Talked a little bit about that at the very beginning. That's going to be also uploaded. So it'll be our entire cast doing our special 2022 holiday or Halloween episode, read live, kind of as a table reading with the whole cast. Great for me because I don't have to mix any sound effects or anything like that. So it'll be a great episode. Encourage all of you to take a look at it once it's available as a podcast if you don't catch the stream. So thank you again.
Thank you. Go ahead, Michael. Let us know where we can hear you and read you and see you more.
All right. So I play the character of Pep Hackett on the Rad Rolls Fallout TTRPG podcast. Takes place in Old New Orleans. You can also visit me on my website, bymicaeltanner.com, where you can learn about my writing endeavors. I highly recommend you check out my comic book series, Orcs in Space. Available. First two trade paperbacks are out now. The third volume will be out in February of 2023. It's a hilarious sci-fi comedy that I wrote with Justin Roiland, co-creator of Rick and Morty. And then, like I said, on my Twitter. And that's basically it. Except Fallout fans, you might be familiar with my work if you watch the Into the Mystery, Mistress of Mystery, Machinima. I was the writer on that. And the final episode of that is actually not coming out because the whole thing's being turned into a full-length movie. It's not going to be full-length. It's going to be like 45 minutes, but it's going to be like one long machinima. So if you like the Mistress of Mystery story in Fallout 76, prepare for that in the next couple of months. And that's me.
That's amazing. I'm excited. Look, thank you both again. Thanks you guys at home for listening. And join us next time. And I'm going to stick with this title. Join us next time for another Fallout about Fallout. Thanks.